Hey everybody, Lindsay Smith here, Professional Development Manager with CIR Realty. In the next few minutes, I want to take you through a quick summary of Creve's new home price index. One of the things to keep in mind is this is just one new metric that you can use to better educate your clients on houses. So don't get too caught up on it. Don't think that this is something brand new you have to learn. It's just a simple number. Understand how it's calculated and where you can find the updated values and things like that. So let's get started. Today what we're going to cover is why do we need the index, what's important about it, what exactly is the index, and how can you guys use it, and obviously what the new stats packages will look like incorporating this value into there. With the exception of pulling active solds that are exactly like properties, the index is the best measure of true price changes in the marketplace. So when you're looking at an overall picture of the marketplace, using an index is much more important. The reason this is because average price and median price fall down on their calculations. Average price treats all homes as equal. So if you have a single family home that sells and it's 2,000 square feet and you have another bungalow that sells for that is 1,000 square feet, those get calculated the same way and are weighted the same because they're both single family homes. And that's not exactly right. It doesn't adjust for composition. It doesn't say, it doesn't adjust for the type of homes that are in there. And the data can always be skewed by outliers. And what they mean by that is that if you have $1 million homes, or you have custom built homes that really shouldn't be involved in there, or if there's certain communities where properties happen to be on a ridge with mountain views, they'll get grouped into the regular amount of data. So average price is not a good indicator. Most of you guys know this already, but when we look at median price, most people say, oh, it's better to take the midpoint of the data. But over the big scheme of the marketplace, that might work out not too bad, but any time that we have multi-million-dollar homes selling or a lot of homes on the low end selling, it can skew where the midpoint of the data ends up and give an overall picture of the marketplace that is fluctuating more than it actually is. When we look at something like apartments in particularly, in this graph here, one of the things that you can see is our blue line and our, well, let's start with average price. The green bars that go up and down show where the average price, the percentage of year over year changes. So we're looking at January 2007, which is the start. We're looking at like 30% changes in the marketplace. And then as we roll down, things change. We get into 08 and obviously up to 2011 and 12. The blue line shows the median price index, and everyone says that median is a better indicator than average, but as you can see here, the median follows the average. So it's very, very close. So what we need is a better fit curve. Pay attention to March 2011. March 2011 is basically saying the average price had, like an 8% change with apartment value indexes. So if you're listing someone's apartment, they would say, well, hey, we had an 8% change year over year in pricing. So my house should be up by that amount. And literally the next month, going into like April and May, it had a drop. But if we were to look at the index value, we can see that there wasn't such a change. Okay, that could have been easily skewed based off of new multi-million-dollar projects going in, different sales, and things like that. There's a ton of different reasons why it skews the data, but that's the reason why that index is not always the best. Sorry, the average and median price aren't always the best indicators. And the next chart here, we see something for apartments just in bank view, and we can see a huge fluctuation in average price as well as median price and the benchmark value, which we're going to learn about today, and that's the index. So the benchmark price that we're using stays quite consistent. You can see there's some fluctuations still, but it's a better indicator of the market overall. And finally, in this one, as we look at year over year change, you can see that median and average price are all over the marketplace. And is it fair to say to our clients that the apartment price change went up in 2011 in March by 80%, 85%? Well, no. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. We can look at the index and see that it stayed fairly consistently. So what your clients might be reading into the Creve stats reports and things like that may not be a good indicator. So this becomes why we need a better value over and above and beyond average and median price. When you look at the home price index, it's the rate at which house prices change over time, taking into account the attributes of the home sold. So now it actually looks at age, number of rooms, square footage, location, proximity, and amenities. And it tracks the willingness to pay for various house features. So if a buyer is willing to pay more for more square footage, the index tracks that. And if a buyer is willing to pay more for a house that's a little bit newer, it tracks that, whereas average and median price don't look at anything else like that. When we look at the home price index, the way it's broken down is first by community. So you would go into a community such as Bankview, and you'd be able to have a look and say, where are the one-story homes in Bankview? And what are all the one-story style homes selling for? So these would be things like bungalows, bi-levels, and different, lower height homes. It would also look at what the two-story homes are doing, single-family homes overall, townhouses, apartment styles, and then you can still get an overall picture. What it's looking at is what is the typical style one-story home in Bankview. So this might be a 1.5 story. It might be an older home that might be a teardown, but it's looking at the typical property to give you a relative price market-wide. And it's quoted in an index value which is relative to a reference year. So in this case, as we're going to learn as we go through here, the reference year is 2005, and the reason they did that is because certain marketplaces don't have data previous to 2005. But in 2005 is assigned a value of 100. So a home's value in 2005 is considered a 100 value price. So that's the index is 100. So today, if we were to look at the home value price today, and the index might be 150 for that particular style home, let's say one-story homes in Bankview, if the index is 150, we're now looking at a 50% price increase. Again, when we look down at what's included in a one-story home, we can see all the different styles here, and you guys can again get this online. Similar with a two-story, you can see that what they call a two-story is more of a composition, and this is what it's going to look like for the city of Calgary overall. We can see that in January 2005, the overall index for all homes, the composite, single-family homes, apartments, and townhouses is 100, because that is the benchmark year where we start the data. In January 2008, after the big market boom, we can see that we were up 84% because it's 184. Single-family was up 80%, apartments up 194, and apartments were up 94%, and townhouses were also up 94%. If we go down to January 2012, we can see that things dropped down considerably, and now we have an index value of 169 overall, which means that since 2005, prices in January 2012 are still up 69%, and then you can scroll through the graph and see the rest of it. So what you're going to see is a benchmark price, and this is a typical property that's based off of the attributes that a home has and the geographical location. So what they're talking about is, what does the typical bungalow or what does the typical one-story in Brentwood look like, and how is that different than the typical one-story or bungalow style home in Lake Bonavista. So these two communities are very, very different, and they will both price out, give a benchmark value for one-story homes. But the thing to consider is that the typical one-story in Lake Bonavista is a lot different than the typical one-story in Brentwood. So it is based off a geographical location, and within that location, the attributes of the home stay constant. So one of the things you'll need to look at is what are the attributes of that particular home. So in this case, if we go back to Bankview, we can see that the basic attributes of an apartment in Bankview are age, 29 years, finished basement, well, no, it's an apartment, living area, 492 square feet. Quick side note on this. The square footage is not going to be a good indicator in our marketplace to consider here. They've tried to use a measurement value that is consistent across the country. One of the things that they consider living area is only livable space, which means that bathrooms and hallways are excluded from this pricing or from the living area calculation. So don't get too caught up on it. You guys can picture in your mind, what does the typical Bankview apartment look like that is 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, no underground parking, so stall parking, and you can have a look and get a feel in your head for what that looks like. We're probably looking at like 800 to 900 square feet, maybe 750, somewhere in that range, and you can really get a feel for what that looks like. So don't get too caught up on the living area in this case. Similarly, with a townhouse, we have the age of property, which is 12 years. because the townhouses are a little bit newer in Bankview. And living area, again, that calculation that excludes bathrooms and hallways and average bedrooms above ground. Now we do have covered parking. Maybe it's a garage, number of full baths, and fireplaces. So you can see that these attributes are all similar across the board for all the apartments in Bankview that are the benchmark attributes and all the townhouses. So if we have something that deviates from that, i.e. you're looking at a 1-bedroom apartment, well, you're going to need to take a look and do a similar CMA, which you have to do all the time, but you can't necessarily use the benchmark home as a good indicator. However, you can use it to define sort of rates of change. Let's say there was a 3% increase in the apartment values in Bankview from one year to the next. You'd probably be able to say that, okay, with the 1 bedrooms, there's probably a similar percent increase. However, if there was only 1% increase with townhomes, you don't want to look at the apartment value index to determine the rate of change with townhomes. So on Krebs.com's website, when you go on there, you're going to be able to find under the market data and then the monthly housing statistics, you're going to be able to find all the information you need on the HPI, the attributes report to find out what the typical home is that you're referring to in that neighborhood, and we're going to take you through that. But Krebs.com, again, once you log in under Creveling, you're going to find all the information you need for this. So let's take a look at some examples. Let's imagine that you're going to do a listing presentation on a Bankview apartment. Well, the first thing that you have to do is a comparative market analysis, or a CMA. The HPI does not replace this tool. The HPI is simply a tool to help you better educate your seller on what the market is truly doing. The first thing you want to look at is going to be the attributes report. So what you want to try and find on the attributes report, and we'll take you through this in a live example, is we want to find out what the HPI is referring to when they talk about the typical features of an apartment in Bankview. And we just showed you guys that a little while ago. It's 29 years old. It has 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. So you can say, is your home inferior or superior to that? Or maybe it's very, very close to that, in which case the HPI is going to be a good indicator of where that benchmark price has moved year to year. The next thing you want to look at is a monthly summary report. This is going to tell you where prices have moved on a month-to-month basis, on a 2-year basis, 1 year, 3 year. It's going to give you a whole range of price changes so you can educate your buyer kind of relative to where they bought it to what they can expect today based off of value. So looking now at the listing property versus the benchmark apartment in Bankview, we can see that putting the two side by side, and this is not how it looks on the actual HPI charts or the summary report or the attributes report, but we can see, importing this data in, that we have the listing property on the right-hand side, and we can see just by glancing at the numbers that obviously the listing property in this case is superior to it. So we were to say that, okay, we got to know the listing property is going to have a higher price than the benchmark. And again, moving through now, we're able to look at the pricing index overall, and let's walk through this for a second. So the community Bankview, this is for apartments from January 2012, and the benchmark price is $201,000. The index is 165.7. which means the base here is 2005. It means that it is 65% higher than it was in 2005. So when we're looking now, after 1 month, there has been a 0.85% change. In 3 months, it's actually decreased by almost 6%. In the last 6 months, it's decreased by 8%. And moves through, last 5 years, it's been down 9%. So in 1 month, there's been a small uptick, but in reality, the prices in Bankview are still declining, trend over trend in terms of apartments. So that's great to know overall, so that you can better educate your client on probably pricing aggressively. Hopefully, they've stabilized now because they're moving down less, or they're starting to stabilize. But overall, it looks like the general trend is that prices are still moving down. So again, if the buyer purchased their home 5 years ago, based on the above pricing trends, today the prices are generally, for that type of home, about 9.95% lower. So if they happen to have bought it back in 2007, you can rest assured that they're probably not going to get their money back out of it. So let's take a look at an example for a buyer. Imagine you have a client that wants to put offer in on a one-story home in Hawkwood. So now we have the different information side by side here. Again, this is not the way it looks like. You'll have to look at these as two separate reports. But the community is Hawkwood. And on the left-hand side, we have all the attributes of a one-story home that they consider in Hawkwood. So you can go through and read all the information. 3 bedrooms above ground, a double garage, 2 covered parking spots, 3 bathrooms. Now, the benchmark price for that style home is $426,300, and then it has all the index values. So again, 65% higher than 2005, and you can see the month-over-month changes. In this circumstance, we're able to look long-term at the data. And now these charts aren't available on there as well. However, you can see that while the seller may believe that the average price has shot up in recent years, the reality is that the actual index has stayed quite the same based on right around that $400,000 mark. So you can see that the index stays a lot more stable than average price. So when you're trying to work with your client to put an offer in, and the seller has looked at the stats package, it's so important to educate the realtor and the seller when making an offer that, the home price index for this typical style home has not changed that much. Another great example is, how our price is trending for one-story homes in Hawkwood compared to Edgemont. And what we can see that for the typical home in Hawkwood and the typical home in Edgemont, and Edgemont homes typically for the one-story are a little bit older, a little bit larger, but other than that have very similar attributes. The benchmark price in Edgemont is quite a bit higher. We have almost $40,000 for a benchmark, and we can see that the prices in Edgemont have gone up considerably. That might be due to schools or other areas around or other amenities around there. But we can see that the trend in Edgemont is that it is recovering a lot better than Hawkwood might be. So when we look at that, if you're going to educate your clients and they say, well, which is a more desirable community? Well, you can't speak to anything else but just what the index is saying is that right now Edgemont seems to be recovering and moving a little quicker than Hawkwood is. And that's just a factual statement. That's not to say that it better fits their lifestyle or anything else, but you can have a look at that. And then if we were to overlay the benchmark comparison prices for Edgemont and Hawkwood, we can see that Edgemont in green has consistently, over the last few years, outperformed Hawkwood. Great. So let's go in and have a look at exactly what it might look like on Creveling. So once you're in Creveling, we're going to click on market data. Then you can go to monthly housing statistics. Now you have access to all the information that you need. So the first thing that we're going to look at is the benchmark attribute report. And this is what it looks like. So you have 631 pages. Now don't get caught up. If you open it up in Adobe Reader, you can see that on the left-hand side, we have a really nice table of contents that takes us through these. So let's imagine that we're talking about a bungalow in Brentwood. So I'm going to click on Brentwood. So for a typical one-story in Brentwood, we're looking at a property that's about 42 years old. We're looking at 2 full bathrooms, a double garage, and you can start to get kind of a feel for the type of home we're talking about. So you can ask yourself, is my home superior to that, inferior, or is it pretty much right around there? In which case you can look at the benchmark price, which we're about to look at, and determine that, hey, you know what, that's pretty close. So once we get a feel for how the benchmark home compares to the home that we're looking at, now we can go in to the market summary report for the current month. So again, using Adobe Reader, we can start to go through the information. This report is a lot smaller, and we're able to see that the information is quite more compact and dense here. So the first thing that we're starting with is single-family homes for April 2012. And we are looking at single-family homes overall. But what we really want to look at is one-stories. So what we're going to do is scroll down, and we want to try to find one-stories. And then once we find the one-stories, we can see that it's broken down in municipality A, B, C, D, the same way our MLS is broken down. All right, so page 17, here's our one-stories. So in this case now, we can know that the typical one-story that we saw in Brentwood, so 40 years old, it has a double detached garage, is going to look like this. It's going to be approximately $460,000. That is up 87.6% since 2005. And over 1 month, that's had a 1.96% change. Over 3 months, it's had a 1.24% change. Over 6 months, it's had a almost 6% change. Same thing for about 1 year. And then when we look further down, we can see that in the last 5 years, Brentwood has almost made a complete recovery from where it was in 2007. So it's almost kind of back at that peak price. And over the last 10 years, we can see that the prices are way up. They've more than doubled because it's over 100% price increase up since 2002. And once we have this information, we're able to educate our clients properly on what is happening in their particular community. One of the interesting things to point out is the difference in communities here. So if you have a listing in, let's say, Beddington, we can see that over the last year, they've actually declined by 1.2%, whereas in something like Bowness or Brentwood, they've actually increased by 7.15% and 6.11% respectively. So what we can see is that you have to look more granular at the different particular style of homes to get a better picture of what the market is actually doing overall. This can be some powerful information for your sellers and some powerful information for your buyers. So go on to Kreb.com, pull off your stats reports, and get familiar with the HPI concept. Remember, the benchmark year is 2005. You want to first look at your attributes report to get a feel for the type of property we're dealing with, and then we can look at our monthly summary reports to get an idea of how the index has changed. That's your quick summary. All the best and doing a ton of business for the rest of the year.